what a blessing it is to be able to have a pretty Sunday. And I know that all we needed was to, let the COVID thing die a little bit and let the sun come out, and our ability to have a good crowd and just grow and grow. And we're still in winter, and I believe God has great things in plan for this church over the summer and over the spring. I just am excited about what God's doing in our ministries all around the world, and we'll have some more reports on that next week so that you'll be able to keep up. But keep praying if you would. We still have several pastors in jail waiting to see a judge, and so their only crime was being a preacher of the gospel. And so we do want to lift them up. And of course we're praying as well because of what's going on the other side of the world. I want you to know that Ukraine is not an unimportant nation. It is a critical nation. It has a lot of things as far as natural resources in it, and it's also very much a part of prophecy in the Scripture. And so we don't want to just say, well, that doesn't really matter. We need to be prayerful about that. We need to pray that God speaks to the heart of Vladimir Putin. He claims to be a Christian. He wears a cross that his mother gave him at all times. And we need to pray that the Lord would speak to his heart and do something, as well as to speak to the heart of our leaders, and that God's will would be supreme in what happens next. But God lets us do what we want to do. He does. He lets us do what we want to do. If you want to do something that you know is wrong, God doesn't usually stop you. He lets you do that and suffer the consequences, and He's a gentleman. God will always be ready for us, but He will not impose Himself on us except in extreme conditions. And so it's really the best thing that we can learn as a nation, or the best thing we can learn as individuals, is that we want His will at the beginning of a situation. And we seek it, and we ask for His blessing and His guidance. He is not supposed to be our last resort. So many times He is, but He's supposed to be our first resort, and that will be when we're living a victorious Christian life. Go with me, please, to the book of Acts, and we're going to be in chapter 17, in the middle of that chapter, and we're going to have a great experience today in understanding what the Lord is doing here in this passage as it could relate to what is going on in our world today. This is a gathering of genius, if you will. What we see here is the story of the unknown God that is part of what Paul uses here in Athens, Greece, to be able to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, the sharing of the gospel is just one thing. It's taking the truth of who God and Jesus are and putting them into the minds of people who aren't thinking about it. Anything that gets that done is the sharing of the gospel. And there are different ways of doing it. There's no one way of doing it. There's only one wrong way of doing it, and that's not doing it. If you're not sharing Jesus in some way, that's wrong. But you don't have to be like a preacher. You don't have to knock them down, shake a Bible in their face, and preach on hell every 5 minutes. You don't have to do that. It works, but you don't have to do that. But what you can do is other creative ways, and Paul gives us a great illustration of a creative way to do that. Now, he's been in revival. He's had some problems. They brought him to Athens, and then his team has left him and said, now don't get into trouble while we're gone. And now they've gone away. They're going to come back again. They're going to renew their efforts as a team. But in the meantime, he's not going to waste his time. He's a great scholar, a great Hebrew man. He grew up in a home that had the balance of Jew and Gentile together. He had always heard about the power of the Greeks and their gods and all of that, because the Roman Empire had swept all the way to where he grew up, as well as to Jerusalem. And so understanding this pantheon of different gods and goddesses that they had, he was going to go around while he was there at the headquarters of all of this and explore and look into and understand what that religion was. That'll help him when he tries to reach others in the Roman Empire, which is what they've just begun to do. So verse 16 of chapter 17 in Acts says, "Now while Paul waited for them," that's his friends, "at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him when he saw that the city was given over to idols." Now, I don't know if you've ever had this kind of an experience. If you're a Christian, you probably have. And that phrase, his spirit was provoked in him. It's a word picture of something that's kind of soft being attacked by something that's sharp. It's not pleasant, is it? Whenever you take a pin and accidentally, run it into the end of a finger, or maybe you've actually cut yourself cutting up vegetables and kind of hurt yourself. It's a painful situation. That's the word that's used here for provoked. His spirit, Paul's spirit, was provoked by what he saw in the city of Athens. He's tender, and now he's provoked. It's stuck him. And you're going to have a reaction. Whenever you stick yourself or hit your thumb with a hammer or something like that, you usually have a reaction. I remember the story of a guy one time that he was fishing, and he had a bad habit of cussing when he didn't catch something. And one day the pastor was going out to see him because he hadn't been in church in a while. And as the pastor was coming up behind him, he didn't see it. The guy had a big fish on his line and lost it, and let out some swear words. And then he turned around and saw the pastor, and he said, "Oh, Pastor, excuse me, man. I if I'd known you were there, I wouldn't." He said, "Listen," he said, you know it's wrong." He said, "If you ask the Lord to forgive you, and then you'd throw that line back out there, I believe the Lord just might let you catch a big fish." And he said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, I'll try it out." He said, "Okay." So he said a prayer of forgiveness. He threw his line back out there, reeling it in real slow, and boom, a big one got on there. And he starts wrestling with that thing and trying to reel it in. About 5 minutes later, he got it right up to the bank and was lifting it up to where he could grab the line. And that big fish took one more giant struggling leap and got off of that hook and poof, back in the water, and it was gone. And the man looked at the preacher and he said, "Now, Pastor, something ought to be said right there." He was provoked. And it was still wrong, so he didn't say anything. But the idea is, what it's like when you're provoked. When something really just sticks and hurts because you see it as a disappointment. Well, that's what the word is here. Paul is disappointed in Acts 17:16. His spirit is provoked because he saw the city was all about idolatry. I'm glad America's not that way. We don't have idols, do we? Oh, no, we don't have idols. In fact, we have so many idols that now we're making movies with these same gods and goddesses in them that they had in Athens. We're learning how to worship gods and goddesses that are of a pagan nature just as they did. And so it should be something that Christians feel, that prick, that sticking feeling in our soul, that how can this be that these people don't get it, that God is God and not these pagan deities? Therefore, he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews. Remember, that's the pattern. They go to the synagogue first because they're monotheistic. And with the Gentile worshipers, also in the back of those synagogues. And in the marketplace, he went to the marketplace and reasoned with them as well, who happened to be there. So he went to the religious crowd, but he also went to the pagan crowd. And his whole thing was to reason with them. That's kind of a gentleman's debate. And they loved doing that in Athens. That was not something that you didn't have to fear that. They loved getting into discussions about religion and gods and goddesses. And history and all of that kind of stuff, philosophy. Verse 18, then certain Epicurean and Stoic philosophers encountered him, and some said, what does this babbler want to say? Others said, he seems to be a proclaimer of foreign gods because he preached to them Jesus and the resurrection. Now, those were the two main camps of philosophers of the day, the Epicureans and the Stoics. And they both had the same outcomes, but they had a different approach to the way they thought and the way they debated and the way they discussed things. So he had accomplished what he wanted to accomplish. He got the whole crowd and all of the different thinkers involved in the same thing, and that is the discussion about who Jesus is compared to these other gods. But they were considering him a babbler, and I don't know, but that might be because of his accent or because of the fact that he was from a different area and everything. But it also means that he was actively discussing. He was pushing the issue. So I think that is also something we can learn. Sometimes we have to push the issue in order to get the discussion going well. Verse 19, after it says, and they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, may we know what this new doctrine of which you speak? We want to know what this is about. And it was new. You see, one thing all the false religions have in common is they don't have what we have. They don't have what the Bible has. They're all about ideas about, the gods are like a hero or they're like this or that, but the gods are all about you worshiping them and giving your lives for them and all of that, which is what we do for Jesus. But the difference is we're doing it because we're saved. They're doing it in order to be saved. They think, well, you know what? If I can please this deity over here this week, then he'll make me rich next week. It's not unlike whenever we go to the casinos, which I don't go to, but if you go to a casino, which you should not go to, and you rub somebody's head for luck, it ain't going to work. Okay? But that's the kind of superstitions that go with all these pagan deities. They all had things that if you did, it would please that deity, and somehow or another that would bring prosperity to your life. And the problem is they understood that there were beings that were above them, but they didn't understand that there was just one true God. They didn't understand that he had a way of reaching to them, and that not just them trying to reach up to a deity. So what we're doing today, we're right back where they were. We've thrown Jesus out of our society, about 80% of it, and now we're bringing back in these pagan gods because we've got to have something to worship. And you'll go to the movies and you'll see in the movies they're fighting these same Greek gods. Gods are fighting gods. Heroes of America or whatever are fighting against these pagan deities and things of that nature. Where do you think Thanos came from? Ares. Some of these other villains that you see that are supernatural villains came from right here where Paul is. It's where it came from. Nothing's new under the sun. And people are still trying to find a way to substitute for the one true Creator God, and it's not going to ever work. By the way, have you noticed this? The pagan gods of that day and of this day have one thing in common. They sin just like we do. Their gods sin. This one has an affair with his sister and gives birth to this new god and all this kind of stuff. They sin all the time. Their gods are created in our image. Whereas our God says that we are created in His image. But we have sinned, and therefore the image of God is tainted, but it's still there. And therefore we have to have a rebirth. We have to be fixed by being born again. And that's a whole different concept than you'll ever see in the ancient Greek world. Verse 19, and they took Paul and brought him to Areopagus. That is the place where they had their debates. And only the elite thinkers were allowed there. They were combination thinkers, philosophers, and rulers. And they would meet there at this hill. The hill was between the agora, the marketplace, and the mountain with all of the temples upon it. And there in the middle of that was a little knoll that these thinkers would meet upon, and they would discuss whatever great philosophical thing was going on in the earth. So they brought him there to the Areopagus, saying, may we know what is this new doctrine? They loved it. For you are bringing some strange things to our ears. Therefore, we want to know what these things mean. For all the Athenians and the foreigners who were there spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or to hear some new thing. That's kind of like today too, isn't it? How do you want to sell a product? It's new and improved. It may be the same as it's been for 100 years. But if you put new and improved on the box, it'll sell faster. We're always wanting something new and improved. It's not anything new. They had it in the ancient world. We have it today. The problem is the new and improved thing that people need is the old story. For all the Athenians like to do this. Verse 22. Then Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus and said, Men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are very religious. For as I was passing through and considering the objects of your worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, To the unknown God. Now, if you're going to be a great soul winner, one of the things you better learn how to use is curiosity. Curiosity is a consistently used tool in the book of Acts. And the idea there is, it's not just for you to get in somebody's face and say, Are you going to go to hell? That's for preachers to do. That's not for you, okay? But what you can say is you can enter into a conversation with somebody and try to get their curiosity. A man named Jesus did this one night when he said, you must be born again. Well, that could mean anything. What do you mean I have to go inside my mama and be born again? What does that mean, Lord? And he said, that which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. You've been born of the flesh, your spirit's dead. You need to be born again of the Spirit. You see how you can say something and stir curiosity, and then bam, you've got them. Now they're going to track with you. They're going to pay attention at least. So you got to get creative sometimes. And here's where Paul says, I looked at all these statues you have to all these different gods and goddesses, and I found one that was a little one over there in the corner, says to the unknown God. And I'm here to tell you, I know that guy. He doesn't have to be unknown anymore. I'll tell you who he is. Creative. Therefore, the one whom you worship without knowing, him I proclaim to you. Notice he didn't ask a question yet. I like asking exploratory questions because you have to get a response. But at the same time, sometimes all you need to do is just tell them the gospel, whether they've let you have permission or not. God, who made the world and everything in it, since he is the Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands. He doesn't need any of this. I'm going to tell you about that unknown God. Let me tell you, he is not able to be trapped in a temple. He can't be worshiped by creating an idol. He doesn't dwell in those things. He's bigger than all of that. Nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. Now look at this. What he is saying to this crowd of high thinkers, and by the way, these are the highest thinkers in the world at the time. Okay? These guys are the students of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. And And they have carried on those traditions. They have memorized those things. Socrates never wrote anything down. Plato and Aristotle wrote things down that attributed back to Socrates, and then they would study these things. They would read these scrolls. That's what they were really into. And so Jesus comes along, and he's talking to them, and he's giving them some wisdom that's beyond anything even Socrates had. And in the midst of that, as he's sharing that, he is getting them in, and they are hungry for the next thought. They see this is a different approach to deity than they have ever seen before. And the first thing he does is attribute to them. Verse 24, God who made the world and everything in it, the first thing he did was identify God as creator. Now let me tell you that in a time when I grew up, we had an assumption that God created everything. Evolution was coming along. It was making its way, but it hadn't yet taken over the minds and hearts of everybody like it has today. And so, you know, I grew up believing that God created everything, but then evolution was true too. And so I was always trying to mix the two, and you can't mix the two. They don't mix. Theologians tried to do that. C.I. Scofield tried to do that. Others tried to do it. Doesn't work. You can't mix evolution and the Creator. They are two different things. And now you have all the evidence now because of the discovery of DNA. There's no way. There's no sign in the DNA evidence of animals, plants, or of humans that there's ever been any crossover from one to the other. So the argument's over, and they know it's over. That came out 20 years ago, 15 years ago. It was already established. The idea that the Big Bang Theory could happen has been destroyed. Science has destroyed it. Not just Christians that are scientists, but secular science has destroyed those two things. That we evolved is now dead, except it's still being taught in school. But among those who are really scientists, they know that creation can't be explained by evolution. They know that. So why are they continuing to lie and cover up? Why do they continue to hide the DNA science? Why are they doing that? Because the only thing they've got right now that keeps them in control is the idea of pushing God out of the picture. They have to keep God out over here. Now, once every 4 years to get reelected, a politician will go visit a church and get it on camera so he can fool you. Don't be fooled. If somebody's an evolutionist and another person is a creationist, vote for the creationist, regardless of where they go to church. Because one is lying to you and the other one's not. And if somebody will lie to you to get elected, you don't want them in office. And you don't want them teaching your child. I mean, don't you think you ought to know what your teacher is teaching your kids or grandkids? Don't you think you have a right to know what the foundational belief that they have, where all truth and knowledge comes from in their teaching? You have a right to know that. And it takes a 5-minute conversation once a year for 12 years to find that out. You ought to know whether those that are teaching your children want them to grow up to believe that God doesn't exist and you evolved from a monkey. And therefore, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. Just live for the flesh is what the conclusion of that is. That's the conclusion of it. The only logical, rational thing you can do if you believe what the secularist believes, the only logical thing to do is to rob, cheat, lie, and steal and get as much of it as you can, have as much pleasure as you can before you die, because when you're dead, you're just dead like a rock and nothing matters. They are right to do that if there's no God. But they don't have a right, if I believe in God and my kids believe in God, they don't have a right to cram that down my children's throats. If you're going to begin any great debate with great minds, and there are no minds today that come close to the first century Athenians, and there's sure no minds today that come close to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and the others. So if that's where we are today, we don't have these great thinkers, then what we really have is a desire our job as Christians is to turn the world around from living for the temporary, living for the pleasures of the moment. We want them to think about what matters in eternity. Not about how do I feel in this moment, but how am I going to feel for the next trillion years? And that's a huge difference in the approach to life. Those two are not compatible. Either the Christian worldview or the secular worldview is going to win. Right now, the secular worldview is winning in America. Has been for about 80, 85 years now. It's been winning. We threw God out of the classroom. We threw God out of the schools. We can't even let the Gideons in anymore to give away free Bibles. They're no longer public schools. You know what they are? They're government schools. Call them what they are. They're government schools. Public schools used to have this ISD on the school bus, Independent School District. You know what that ISD is supposed to mean? Some of them still have it. Most of them don't. ISD means I don't get any money from the state. I don't get any money from the national government. Only my local community has the money and the funding for my school, and therefore we can do whatever we want to with our program. But you know what we've done over the last 50 years? We've taken more and more money from the state, more and more money from the federal government. Now they're telling us what our textbooks are going to be. They're telling us what we're going to teach. They're telling us who we're going to hire. They form teachers' unions. What in the world does an independent school district need with a teachers' union? The only time unions have ever helped is in the first 2 decades of their creation. They help people get a better wage. And after that, they turn into humanistic, evolution-based, evil tools of Satan. I'm telling you, folks, we need to take back control. Listen, you say, well, those are government schools. They're not. They're public schools. Take them away. Take them away. You know, the federal government only gives about, 2 to 12% of the income of a local public school. So tell them to take a hike. We don't need any money. We'll just take up a love offering to Baptist Church and pay for the difference. Why do we let them have 90% of the control of our kids when they're only given 2 to 12% of the money? Crazy. Crazy. You know what they did? Texas won the battle to throw the humanist textbooks out about 10 years ago. It was controversial. They won the battle. They're going to bring back the old textbooks. They're going to have the teaching of what actual history is. They're going to teach actual science. They rewrote the old textbooks and all that got ready. And bam, just like that, the federal government said, we're funding all of these programs for online curriculum so you don't have to buy those textbooks. Because whatever textbooks Texas was using, 34 other states were using. You don't know why most of your curriculum now is some kind of online humanistic weirdo stuff for your kids and your grandkids? You know why? It's because Texas won that battle. And actual physical hard textbooks now, some of them are teaching truth, and they can't stand that. The people in charge of the state and the people in charge of the national, they can't stand that. And now many in big cities and ours, we're fighting the battle of humanism in our school boards here in Northwest Arkansas. It's an amazing thing. It's a crazy thing that we have to fight that battle. But here we are. We're fighting that battle. And it all comes down to one thing, worldview. Is it a creator God or is it evolution? And if you believe in evolution, then you can't blame them for what they're doing. They're just lying, cheating, and stealing to get your children's minds so they can have more and more money and power over them. There's nothing, you can't blame them Because if you believe in evolution, there is no God, then it's only right that the survival of the fittest, so you better get fit. But if it's true that there's a God and that He created it all and we're accountable to Him, and someday we're going to stand before Him in a judgment, and He's already given us a way of salvation by the death of His Son, the resurrection of His Son, then we had better learn how to use that as a part of our tools when we go and speak. Don't be ashamed at a school board meeting to say, listen, I'm a Christian. I have a theocentric worldview, and I believe we're all accountable to Almighty God, and that He gave us principles and rules to live by, and this school and some of its leadership are not living according to those principles, and I insist they do, or we're walking out of here. Let me tell you, part of what has to happen for us to bring the Third Great Awakening to America is we've got to bring God back to the classroom. Not going to happen any other way. And that means we've got to throw Satan's teachings out of even the public schools. Listen, the public schools doesn't mean secular. The public school means they belong to the public. Not the government and not the universities. They belong to the people and the citizens that live within about a 20-mile radius of that school. That's who owns the schools, even the ones that are paid with government money. Take your schools back. If the state government says, we're going to give you this much money, but you've got to teach this, this, and this, then you say, excuse me, we don't want your money. Send them to school with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and sit under a tree and learn the truth, if that's what it takes. Jesus did a pretty good job teaching under trees. You don't have to have a billion-dollar campus to have a public school. Same thing's true here. The Greeks didn't need a big classroom. They taught out in the open air. Shared the deepest thoughts there could ever be shared right there out in the open. And that's where this took place. Verse 26, Paul says to them, he says, God has made of one blood every nation of men to dwell over all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. You know what that means? God knows everything about everybody, and He determines when you're born and when you die. You are not here as a freak accident in the 21st century. God picked you to be alive in the 21st century. He could have had you born in the Dark Ages. He could have had you born in the Old Testament times. He picked this time for you to be born because He wanted you and I, as Christians, to be the ones to deal with the world as it is. Paul's trying to tell them that. You guys are here not by accident. God picked the time that you're here. Now, this is bigger than, they thought all this stuff was ascribed to different deities. And Paul's saying, no, it's all one God. He decides all of this. So you don't have to please them all. You just have to please this one God. He has made us one blood. Look at verse 26. He has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth. All right, this is big time. I want you to get this one. The Bible says that we are all of one blood. It says it in the Old Testament too. The story of creation is from one couple, Adam and Eve. Then God judged the earth, and we're down to one couple again, and it's Noah and Mrs. Noah. We all came from the same families. We are all brothers and sisters in one sense, but really at least cousins in another. I'm sorry, but you know, when you're at that hog football game and you're yelling for the Hogs to beat Texas, and those Texicans are on the other side and they're yelling back at you, you're in the same family. Same family. Sorry. Same family. Now, That's important. That's very important because if we are of one blood, as it says here, then that means you should be able to test and see if we're of one blood. Guess what? 15 years ago, all of the basic scientific journals and all the scientific magazines, within a year or so of each other, all had the same headline. And the headline was that DNA had proven, all the DNA strands that they had run the computers over and all that had proven there were not 4 or 5 or 6 races. One race. One race. Now irrefutably proven. But why then are we stirring up race wars when there's no such thing as race wars or race? It's all they've got left, folks. To hold back a great awakening, they must sow racial division all across America, across Europe, across the rest of the world. They must have racial division for those liberals and humanists, dialectical materialists to continue to run everything in this world. If they prove and have proven that there's one race, then it will lose every argument they have, and the end result will be, well, then who is our God? And we'll be in a revival, awakening before you know it. Why are they not teaching that anymore? That's the truth. They don't even teach. They've gone back to teaching evolution again in the schools. When they know it's a lie. They know it's a lie. Their own journals have said it's a lie. And they continue to tell that lie. Because if they don't put us against each other, then we will be with each other. And people are going to say, you know what? If we're all one family, it's got to be that we're created. And if we're all created in the image of God, then maybe we should all be seeking what His will is. And the end result would be another great awakening. People being saved all over the world. Folks, that's where we got to go. We can't let them win. Paul saw the need of it. In order to win Europe, he had to win Athens and Greece, and in order to win Athens, he had to get these greatest minds of Athens and proclaim to them, there is one blood. And God made it that way. So when you see somebody that looks different than you, that can't talk English, and you don't understand how they dress and why they talk like that and where they're from and why they're a different color and all that kind of stuff, I just want you to think one word with me, okay? When you see them, think one word. Cousin. Cousin. The word cousin's big in Arkansas. We ought to know how to use it, right? Cousin. Not only that, he says in the second half of that verse, He has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. God has you thinkers of Athens here at this moment in time. You weren't born when Socrates was alive. You're born now because it's part of God's plan, and you are not an accident. You are here intentionally by the purpose of Almighty God who created you. One of the things we've got to preach to people is that they are important to God, that God has a plan for their life, and they are not an accident. The world's telling them they're an accident, so why don't you just live for the flesh? Our government, you and I, are paying for millions and millions of dollars to go into drug labs on the West Coast so that people on the street can come into a lab, have a doctor and a nurse to give them their illegal drugs and let them get their high over with in a protected little cubicle and go back out on the street. That is your government with your money sponsoring the continual addiction of more and more of the population. They want us all hooked on drugs so they can control us. That's what the whole California Democratic Party is about. Creating a nation of drones and slaves that'll vote when they want them to and how they want them to and as often as they want them to. or they won't get their drugs. You know, I say things like this, and 5 years later it gets proven. And nobody ever comes back and says, "Preacher, I thought you were an idiot, but you were right." But this is true, folks. Just go check it out. Check out the news. You'll see what I'm telling you is what's happening. That's the reason our debt is so big. They want to crash this economy. It is their purpose because it will put us dependent upon the 1% that are the ruling class, and they want to destroy this economy. They want another $5 trillion in debt, because if they destroy this economy, then you and I become nothing more than $100 a week drone slaves to a federal bureaucracy, and state governments will cease to exist. We will be Russia. That's their goal. They envy, they quote people, that wonderful young man that's trying to stop truckers up in Ottawa, their prime minister. His hero, his stated hero of government leadership is Fidel Castro. And by the way, most of our leaders in Washington, D.C. also have a great envy for the Castro brothers. They see that and ancient Russia. They see the USSR. Why can't we be like that? And they get mad when the Christians get in their way. And yet more and more and more Christians just keep, "I've been a Democrat all my life, and my mama was a Democrat, and my great-grandmother was, I'm going to vote that way." Well, listen, if the Democrat you're voting for believes everything in the Bible, then vote for them. But you're not going to find any of them. I don't vote for somebody because they're Republican. I vote for them because they have a Christian worldview. If they don't have a Christian worldview and there's a Republican or a Democrat, I'll just write in Donald Duck on there. I'm not going to vote for a humanist. I'm not going to vote for a secular, so I'm going to vote for somebody that says they believe in God and goes to a church once a year and get it on video so they can get reelected. And I'm not going to vote for them unless they show the markings of Christ in their life. Just that way. Just that way. All right, y'all been stuck on verse 26 long enough. Let's go to 27. So that they, why is all this in 26? It's because so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for Him and find Him, though He is not far from each one of us. In other words, if we teach the two principles in verse 26, people will automatically want to seek the Lord. You say, it's so hard to be a soul winner today. It is hard. But if you got these two things done, they'd come to you. They'd come to you. They'd be begging. The churches would be full. The evangelical soul-winning churches would be full and overflow and have to go to 20 services a Sunday to take care of the crowds if we could get them convinced of the two things in verse 26. That's all there is. If you can see that we are one nation, that we are one blood, that we are all created in the image of God, that we're not evolved, basically. If you'll see that, and that God has determined your pre-appointed times and the boundaries of your life and your dwellings. If you can get those two things, there's a personal God that created you and He has a plan for your life. That's what verse 26 says. If you can believe that, then they would seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for Him and find Him, though He is not far away. For in Him we live and move and have our being, as also some of your own poets have said, for we are also His offspring. That's the quote from the poet. Therefore, since we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, something shaped by art and man's devising. Truly, these times of ignorance, agnosticism is what it's basically saying, which is also a Greek word. It means it's gnosis, knowledge, and the alpha negative in the front of it, In other words, the word Gnostic, knowledge, in front of it means without knowledge, negated knowledge. It's the word usually translated imbecile. Somebody who could learn but refuses to learn truth is an imbecile.
And agnostic means I don't want to know what the truth is. That's what agnostic means. An atheist says, I deny the possibility of a God. There are no atheists. No such thing as an atheist. Somebody can say they're an atheist, but for somebody to actually be an atheist, they would have to be God. Only God can be an atheist, and He's not voting for it. Atheist means that there's no possibility in any way that a God exists. But to say that, you would have to have total knowledge. Or you'd have to admit that a God exists outside of your knowledge. But most atheists think they know it all. But there's no such thing as an atheist. If you're an atheist, you're just an arrogant jerk. If you can't, it's impossible to be an atheist. Because you would have to have total knowledge to be an atheist. So the best thing you can go to is an agnostic, which means I am without knowledge that there is a God. That's what an agnostic is. You take the word gnosis, which means knowledge, you add the alpha negative to it that negates it. So agnostic means someone without knowledge, no knowledge. So if you're an idiot, you cannot believe in God. That's what an agnostic is, an intentional idiot. I'm just telling you what Greek means, okay? I'm sorry. I'm not trying to insult any particular person. I'm just saying you have picked a horrible vocabulary for yourself if you're proud of being a Gnostic, or, an agnostic. Truly, verse 30, these times of ignorance God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent. Now that Christ has come, you can't be that way anymore. The word repent, of course, has that idea of turning or to think again on it. To reverse your thinking is what it means in this context. So God says to you, look at this. Paul is talking to the smartest philosophers in the world and saying you need to change the way you're thinking. One of the things you have to be in these kind of times, you have to be bold. You can be respectful, you can be creative, but you can't be cowardly. They'll eat you alive. Verse 31, because he has appointed a day. Woo-hoo! He has appointed a day on which he will judge the world of righteousness by the man whom he has ordained. He has given assurance of this to all by raising him from the dead. So he's now preaching the resurrection. And there's a judgment coming. He has appointed a day. Now, folks, that's got to be part of how we win this generation. Not only do you need to consider Christ because he's the only viable alternative to the understanding of what we are as a created world. Not only is he the only one that that is able to give you forgiveness and eternal life, but he's saying to them here, he says that the man that I'm talking about is going to come someday. He's appointed a day when he's going to come back and judge every one of us. Verse 32, and when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, they mocked. Some of them mocked, while others said, we will hear you again on this matter. So Paul departed from among them. However, some of the men joined him and believed. Among them was Dionysius, the Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. So I don't know how many believed later on, but already 3 were coming and wanting to know more information. And we do have in history, we do have at this time in the early church a man that became a great leader of the church there in Athens who was named Dionysius. So probably what Paul was doing in this process of trying to be a witness on this particular site, he didn't know it, but he was seeing somebody won to the Lord who would become the pastor of First Baptist Church, Athens. What a wonderful moment as God has used this. Now, this is what happened. See, everybody that was with Paul was off somewhere else, and Paul was just wandering through the streets on his own and got into this mess. So you should never leave your pastor alone. He'll get in trouble every time. If you don't believe me, ask his wife. Judge Jesus is coming on a certain day, is what verse 32 is. Listen, folks, it's okay when you share Jesus to talk about He's coming again. And He's coming different than His first coming. First coming was a baby in a manger who would grow up and die for us on the cross. Second coming, He's coming as King of Kings and Lord of Lords to cast the vengeance of His Father on all who don't believe and to gather His own unto Himself. That day is an appointed day. That's what this says. It's an appointed day. It's going to come. Jesus has already set the date. God the Father set the date. Jesus said in His earthly life, no man knows the hour of the day except the Father who is in heaven. But now that Jesus is in heaven, He knows everything the Father knows, and so now Jesus knows the day too. The day is there. It's set. I don't know when that is. Could be this afternoon. But He's coming. And it's going to happen as surely as He came the first time. As surely as Moses gave the Ten Commandments. As surely as He spoke the world into existence in 6 days. As surely as any of that, He's coming again, because just like those other days, it's an appointed time. Man, I'm excited to be alive in the day and the time in which we live. This is the best time that anyone could ever be alive. One last little word. Jesus taught differently than the other rabbis. They stayed in the synagogues and the temple, did most of their teaching. Jesus just walked around. He just walked around. He did it. He taught His 12 under a shade tree, or maybe in the corner of a field on a Sunday, because you were allowed to eat the corn in the corner of a field on a Sunday. Maybe He would just be, walking from one town to another and little children playing, and He would bend down and talk to the children, and He would just use the moment. And do you know where that came from? Didn't come from the Jews. That came from the Greeks. That's the way Socrates taught his boys. That's the method of the Greeks. Jesus did most of His teaching using Greek methodology. John, who wrote the Gospel of John and 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, Revelation, that John, he was also influenced by all of that. And so he picked up a word out of the Greeks that was used for Jesus in John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word. That word for word was logos. It's a word that we put on the end of everything that we have that we study. That is numerology. Logos is the last part of numerology. Ology. The same thing is true of many of the other sciences. They all end in that same ending. They get that from the word logos. It's a word that means to know experientially. It is a word that Jesus intentionally picked for John to use in John chapter 1, verse 1, and particularly as he was using it there, he's saying in the beginning was the Logos was with God, the Logos was God, all things were made by Him, nothing was made by Him nothing that was made any other way than by the Logos. And then in verse 14, this mind of God that is the Logos, this enumeration of the plan of God that is Logos, this is establishment of the plan of God that is Logos. Those are the three elements of it that Socrates taught. He said the Logos is the mind, it is the consistent rollout of the thoughts of the mind, and it is the establishment of the purpose of the mind. All of that is involved in the philosophical word Logos. And John picked that word by the Holy Spirit's leadership, and he said, in the beginning was the Logos, the mind, the enumeration, and the establishment of the plan of God. And then in verse 14 he said, and the Logos became flesh. The mind, the enumeration, the establishment of the plan of the Father became flesh and dwelt among us. And that is who Jesus is. Don't you ever let the philosophers, the Socratic, self-fulfilled professors, ever convince you that we don't have a faith that's more grand and complicated, specific and truth-based than they'll ever have. We have it. We have the truth. We have the understanding of the truth. We have the application of the truth. And we have the ability to share the truth. And there's nothing that should make us back down from this fight. We will win if we will just purpose to win by revealing this book to a world that really wants to know